Welcome to the Zillow session. If you're not intending to hear from the guy from Zillow, you're in the wrong room. Although you walked all this way, so I'm pretty sure you know where you're supposed to be. Okay, my name is Chris Toomey. I'm the Senior Data Engineer for Analytic Platforms at Zillow in Seattle. Before I get started and we talk about the agenda, does everybody know or have heard of Zillow before? Yeah? How many of you check your Zestimate or the Zestimate of your neighbors a couple times a day? Those of you who are not raising your hands, you're all liars. So today, in this hour, I'm going to try to be done in about 40 minutes because I want to leave plenty of time for questions. And in the Q&A, please feel free to ask me about anything you've seen, anything we're working on. If you want to know about analytics at Zillow that has nothing to do with the content of this presentation, I'll happily answer it to the best of my ability. I don't write the Zestimate, I just sit next to those guys. So I'll do a quick introduction of myself and Zillow, just in terms of an analytic background. Talk about kind of how we think about Tableau and what my guiding principle is and why mine is the one that matters. Talk about some situations and solutions. Both we call the front end and the back end, not necessarily UI and database, but users and systems. And then we'll leave time for Q&A. So, quick introduction. Again, my name is Chris. I'm a political science major. So I have a background in international studies, master's in global politics, which means that I have advanced degrees in arguing with you. I studied at the University of Washington, go Dogs, and the London School of Economics. I'll show you my desktop background later. But from there, I went into government consulting, where I worked for the US Department of Energy. Fun fact about Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, the term visual analytics was born there. The National Visual Analytics Center, the gentleman by the name of Jim Thomas, who's actually on a lot of strange posters around the lab, that's his term. So I've been doing visual analytics for a long time. PNL started with Tableau v2. I started with Tableau v5. I spent 2 years at Slalom in Seattle. There's a couple of my fellow slalomers here. And then I moved on to Zillow, where I've been there for about 18 months. I've research, analysis, PM, consulting, engineering, hacking. I kind of do all kinds of things. But I've been doing the core thread of that is Tableau. But for the one person or two people in the room, particularly if you're from outside the United States who don't know what Zillow is, we are the largest online real estate platform in the United States. Our goal is to build a marketplace that empowers people to find home. Buy a home, sell a home, rent a home, get a mortgage, creep on your neighbors. We want to expose this data to you. We call this turning on the lights. This is a core tenet of Zillow. And this is actually something that we live by, and it informs how we manage our data and analytics in Tableau internally. We use data every day to make our decisions about product, investments, our people. And it's really what allows us to live by our other core values. We try to make sure that we use data to own our future and to help us think big. And more importantly, data is what brings us all together and makes everything a team sport. And that's a lot of business jargon and colloquialisms all at once. But essentially, we work together to build the product in the company that we want so that we can build the product that you want. And by the way, we are hiring. I'll split the bounty with you if you get hired. So what does our Tableau environment at Zillow look like? Well, on the desktop side, we have about 147, 150, give or take. That's doubled in the last year. We have about 3,500 server users, give or take. We have about 788 active workbooks and 1/4 of an administrator. It's large, but not huge. It's not UBS, it's not Wells Fargo, it's probably not even Amazon. But it covers everything. Everything at Zillow flows through Tableau. And it also covers our family of brands, because we're not just Zillow, we're Trulia and HotPads and StreetEasy. But all of this infrastructure has one goal, and that is to expose the massive amount of data that we collect. We have more than a petabyte of data under storage in various systems: SQL Server, MySQL, S3, Hive, via Presto. We also have what I call little data, which is all of the little spreadsheets that run around in Dropbox and Google Sheets that the so-called shadow IT that Francois was nagging on this morning. It happens. It's there. We got to deal with it. So we try to find ways to make it sustainable and keep it protected. The core component here is that all of this data, with the exception of a couple of key metrics, is available to everyone all the time. We believe in empowering people with data, and if you believe in that, then you don't just get to say, well, this data and not that data, it's data or no data. We have to make sure that we live by the way we want to embody the values that we write down and we actually put on our walls. This means that all of our workbooks are also exposed to everybody in the company. And that quarter of an administrator, yes, that is my job. That is not my day job, but I own it. That's everything you see here that Tableau touches belongs to me. So, how do you make it work? I spend a lot of time with our users. That's the way this whole thing works. You can talk about IT and administration, but if you do not spend time with the people who use your product, it ain't gonna work. I mean, you can ask some of the people I consulted with, by thinking you are smarter than them and know more than them, you are gonna get in trouble. They are your customers. I need to know how to help them. I also need to know what's causing them stress, where the product is, where it isn't meeting their needs, and what resources do I need to develop so that they can be successful. They shouldn't be the ones writing scripts. They should be the one solving business problems. So on the product side, I've spent 7 years developing relationships with the product team and people like Nelson and Dan and Mark, the other people in the community who I can ask for help, because I can't do it all myself. I pass my feedback to Tableau through my rep and the people that I know there, and I'm always willing to ask for help. But things that I build that might be valuable, I try to share it as much as possible, because other people have similar problems. Internally, the way this works is that I both build and I teach. My role is to not build actual workbooks, but it's to actually help people build them themselves. It's the whole teach a person to fish. So what I'm going to cover today is some of the things that I have built and that I can actually share. But when we talk about training, we keep things very simple. We do 2 trainings a month on advanced topics that are driven by needs in the community. So we spend a lot of time on calculations. But it could be other things, and those are all driven by my user base. I also run a quarterly Tableau 101 for new users, people who want a refresher. We want to expand into different parts of the organization. We want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to participate if they want, and I never say no to a desktop request. Granted, I may not have the desktops, but I actually have a tool that helps me keep those 147 in active use. Because again, we're about empowering people. I also run weekly office hours. Just drop in, ask any question you want, again, to help people do the things that they need to do. I open up my calendar, and we have the perfunctory Slack channel for ad hoc conversations. So all of this is about making people successful, so I keep it simple, and I have one guiding principle. Whether it's helping people build a dashboard, a new analytics product, or making our server environment run smoothly, I only solve the problems I actually have and not the ones that I think I have. Now that may sound subtle, but if my users aren't complaining about extracts, I don't care about extracts. I don't have time. I've got a day job. So I'm not going to spend time building a workbook that monitors extracts if that's not a problem that my users have. Now, when a problem does arise, and I do actually have problems with extracts, we solve it as fast as humanly possible, and we put it into production. This is not a think fast and break things, but we try to find the simplest solution and iterate on it as necessary. And most importantly, don't solve the same problem twice, because otherwise you're just going to be caught in this endless loop of doing things over and over and over and never actually getting anywhere. So let's talk about a few. I think about splitting up Tableau at Zillow into two components. We have the front end, which is users and their experience, and the back end, which is all of the systems that make it run. The first problem, and this is unique, this is not unique, is how do we get a user onboarded? What is the simplest way to define our environment? When I first started at Zillow, our server was a mess. We had too many permissions. I got 16 emails a day. Can I get access to this workbook? Can I get access to that workbook? So I went to the community and said, is there an actual reason why it was set up this way? And they said, this is just the way it was set up. So we changed it. We burned server down, and we rebuilt it to reflect the way people wanted to access data, which was all of it, minus the stuff that gets you in trouble for insider trading. So this helped me redefine the basics of what a user needs to know and set the foundation for Tableau moving forward. And to help solve this problem once and for all, we went through these questions, and we created a 1.5-page onboarding document that everybody gets access with their key. They read it, and they have things that they have to do, and if they don't do them, then they don't get access. It's that simple. We use Dropbox because it's simple. It's what we have. We don't have to invent anything new. And instead of slamming it into some esoteric wiki, I just put it in something that everybody can have on their desktop. We keep everything in Dropbox, not just the document, but all of the drivers, all of the best practices, everything that anybody could ever need goes into one spot. And because the onboarding process requires them to have access to it, they know where it's supposed to go. In parallel with this, I have to assume that my users are adults. I can't babysit them. Do you have access to Dropbox? Did you look at the thing? If you don't look at it, then you're going to lose your license in 6 months when someone else comes asking for it. So, we try to keep things simple, but make sure that everyone's doing the things that they're supposed to do. Number 2, my least favorite problem right now, licenses. Everybody wants one. It's a credit to the product that it is so successful. Like I said, we've doubled our user base in a year, and demand is growing. I think I've got a list of 10 or 12 people who want a key, and I think I've got 3 to hand out. So we've noted that usage is very bursty. Some of it is frequent, some of it is infrequent. Some people it's once every 6 months. But the problem is it's a nightmare. It locks up keys. And I don't know if you've ever had to use the customer portal with Salesforce, but I hate it. It's awful. It doesn't really work. We also have to track keys across Windows and Mac. And the problem there is that the tools that Tableau has given us around desktop reporting work fine on Windows, but require a hard restart on a Mac, and you're not quite sure it actually works because you actually have to have access to the machine. So if you don't have something like Ghost and can actually edit remotely someone else's machine, this tool is worthless. So Tableau gives us this handy viz here, but what I actually need to know is who do I have to call to go grab that license back? Who isn't using it? So what we built here is what I call the license monitor. This is a copy of the desktop reporting table in Postgres, plus a download of the all keys export from Salesforce. Mash them up, track their usage, and the left-hand side is a list of all the keys we want to reclaim the last time they used it, and the right hand is just my log of did I email them and what did they say. The beautiful part about this is it's a live connection. So if someone emails me back and says, hey, I'm keeping my key, I type in keeping, I hit refresh, and their name comes off the list. So now I know. I always have an up-to-date view of the keys that are available all the time. So 1, this helps me shake a couple of keys loose every month or so. And 2, it helps us, sorry Bill, it helps us keep our buys in the 1 to 5 range instead of the 15 to 20 range. Zillow's a cheap company. We want to be frugal. So, we try to respect the finance department a little bit. So we want to make sure we're buying and right-sizing our environment. Here's what it looks like. Lauren Ford actually decided to return her key. When I refresh the sheet, her name comes off. And so now I know that her key it's back out in the wild, and these are the people who are going to get a nasty gram email from me. Well, this doesn't quite work for me. It's still kind of manual. I would like something a little more automated. So this is something that's work in progress. I got to give a hat tip to Mark Wu of the Silicon Valley Enterprise User Group and a forthcoming feature in 10.5 called ATR. Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to wrap all of our desktops in one master key. We're going to do a massive deactivation. We're going to set an expiration date on your key. So if you don't use it for 90 days, you lose it, which returns it to the pile. And all a user has to do is ask a Slack bot for a key, get an installer, they're ready to go. And now, I don't have to waste any more time on licenses. I know exactly how many I have. I know exactly how many are in use. And if I have to not renew one, again, sorry, Bill, I won't. It keeps our environment the right size. It makes it self-service all the time. As far as I know, the ATR function, which is, they call it virtual desktop support, is coming into, it got pushed from 10.4 to 10.5. The single master key is something you have to ask your rep about. Next, consistency. We get the complaint that everything looks bland, or something ended up on the CEO's desk and it's in Redfin colors and it should be in Trulia's colors, and it just, or I've got this crosstab here, isn't it beautiful? So most important, we're not here to make aesthetically pleasing things. We want them to be functional, so at least have some consistency. We have brand standards and guidelines for a reason. So how do I accomplish simultaneously educating people to internalize best practices, but also help them apply it as fast as possible? One, I want them to understand the choice so they can make the change fast. So what I did, this is something I did at Slalom as well, is every visualization type that shows up in Show Me has a slot in our 30-page style guide that details both the what, where, and why, and how you would use that visualization. Now, not everyone likes to read 30 pages, so we also include a preferences.tps file, so it's all baked in. And more importantly, we have what's called the one-click styling workbook. We've taken our brand, worked with our brand guidelines and our visualization experts and our econ team to actually create templates. So the idea is that you build your viz however you like, and then you just open up the style guide, copy the formatting, paste the formatting, and you're done. One-click formatting, no templates, all for free. So let me show it to you really quickly. I think it's this one. Yeah. So what we do is we go through each of the parts of a viz. We have textual hierarchies, we have formatting tables, we have highlight tables, bullet charts, scatter plots. And the beauty of this is that we do this not only internally. I happen to like the 538 style. Econ likes the plain white style. But we also have to account for printing. So we've adapted this to be print safe so that no matter anything that comes out of Zillow looks like Zillow all the time. Now, it may be a convoluted dashboard, but hey, at least it's on brand. And this is all you have to do: copy, paste, formatting. Now, this isn't perfect because depending on your viz level of detail, this may not actually work 100% of the time, but 50% is better than 0, so I'll take it. Okay. Next, extracts. Initially, every member of our publishing community was a site admin, just because it's simple. We stopped doing that because people deleted things they weren't supposed to, but this took away their visibility into kind of the background jobs, this extract monitor. Eventually, everyone's going to have an extract problem. It took me 1.5 years to have one. And hyper may be fast, but essentially what that means is you're just going to have more extracts running around because you can do more all at once. I'm always an advocate for live over extract, but I recognize that monitoring is something we all have to do. I really don't like this view. It doesn't tell me about who these things belong to. It doesn't tell me how often they have failed. It doesn't give me really great insight into what's causing them. Are there time gaps? It's just kind of there. So I built a cleaner one and made it personalized. And this is accessible to everybody on our corporate production site. Extract Monitor V2. Essentially, after conversations with the users about what they need to know, that's what we built. It's organized by individual, the job, is it a workbook or a published website, or sorry, a published data source? Did it fail or succeed? How did it happen over time? We look at the timing of the extracts. How long do they take? How long are they getting delayed? And then we look at the distribution of errors. And actually what we found is a lot of people, their workbooks were getting skipped. So this led me to do an email campaign that said, hey, publish it or get rid of it. You're killing me here. Again, but up in the very top, and actually I think I have it here. Yeah, I do. There's a filter that says, show me my stuff. Because we can look at everybody's stuff, but you really care about yours. So this is set up with a user filter just to say, I'm Chris, I want to look at my jobs, what do I need to go fix? So I don't have to go wading through this sea of content. And actually, you can't see it there. It's right there. Okay. The last one, and this is a recent effort for us, is content metrics. It started off with who's looking at my stuff. And then we really wanted to get into what's our user base look like? Who's using it? Is there seasonality to it? Is it coming from sales? Where's the demand coming from? Who's producing or who's not producing? We have 150 workbooks. Is it 10% of people, 20% of people? What's the percentage of people actually consuming this content? Both on a global level and a per workbook level. And then we also do some content management. We want to know what stuff could kind of, get chucked. So we built this core report metrics dashboard. It covers all sites. We cover traffic, production and consumption, per workbook consumption. So that's at both the workbook and the view level. We can just see who's looking at stuff. And then we have stale content, which we'll come to in a minute. But again, this is very simple. It's built on top of Matt Cole's published data sources from TC16. If you don't have them, go get them. They're fantastic. You can solve almost 90% of your Tableau server admin stuff with those data sources. It's fantastic. I know Nelson actually has pulled queries straight out of it for other uses. It's a really great vetted thing, and Matt is fantastic. Matt Coles. C-O-L-E-S. He runs Tableau's internal Tableau server. And these are all available in one of the tech docs on the forums. Okay, so that's kind of the front end stuff around the user experience. Let's talk about the back end. And spoiler alert, you're gonna see some code here. It's okay. I've tried to document it, so it's fairly easily understood. I also have Python notebooks, so it's easy to step through it. So this is really about me automating myself out of an admin job because I've got a regular day job to do, as most of us do. So there's really two types of server work: production, core tasks, keeping things up and running, and then testing, like new features, new versions, quick deploys, looking at logging, parallelization. How do I hand this off to somebody or hand it from dev to prod? I despise day-to-day server work. It's just awful. Remote desktoping into a machine or using PowerShell to do standard production tasks of backups and cleanups and all of this stuff. And if you ever had to look at a Tableau log, I'm sorry. It's really a pain. So how do we simplify this stuff? Because I'd rather spend more time in empowering my users. So the first one is, and this is really straightforward, this is putting TABADMIN on path. The reason for this is that anytime you open up a terminal, you can just type TABADMIN whatever, and whatever your location is, Tableau server will execute from there. So if you happen to open up into the Dropbox folder or whatever, and you type TABADMIN backup, it will deposit the backup in that folder. You don't have to worry about the path. There's no dependencies here. It's a node. I wrote a node script to automate this because we happen to install on T instead of C, because I guess our ops team thought they were being clever. But the idea here is that now we can execute any activity from PowerShell, the CLI, or any other automation platform without having to worry about escaping and whatever. Now, it's written in Node. If you've never seen Node, it's just JavaScript. This is written slightly in the new ES6 syntax, but essentially we store a bunch of variables, and it checks whether you're installing into C or not C, and you tell it what Tableau version you're using, and it handles the rest for you. The output of this is just a batch file that lives in Win32. This is setup. This is kind of the core piece that helps this run. My first problem goes back to onboarding users. Everybody gets a sandbox. And if I have to onboard 30 users, I don't want to sit in front of server and be like, create project, change owner, create project, change owner, create project, change owner. This is my responsibility to provision and assign ownership. But I don't know how many there's going to be. So I need to be able to check and build. So to solve this, I wrote a Python script, and I'm cheating. All of the usernames map to the project names, so I can compare one list to the other. All publishers are in an AD group. We manage everything through AD. And in this case, we're hitting the Viz Portal API. And the basic idea is log in, get the list of projects, get the list of group. If A is not in B, then give them a new sandbox and change the ownership. And then we send them a notification on Slack that says, your environment's ready to go. And because it's in Python, we can automate it, we can stick it in whatever scheduling tool we like.
What was it about the REST API that you couldn't use?
You cannot assign project ownership via the REST API as of 10.3. You can assign workbook ownership, but you cannot assign a project ownership. It's not a function that's available. So thanks to Mark Jacobson's fully documented, undocumented API post, I just stole a lot of his functions and put it in there. But this is unstable because it could get deprecated. But it works, and it works really quickly. I run it once a week. The next question is the inverse, is what happens when somebody leaves? Do they have content? Do they have granted, a sole project that runs around isn't actually hurting me, but I'd rather just not have extraneous stuff. I'm kind of OCD about that. So I need to make sure if I delete stuff, but it also gives me an opportunity to reevaluate if content that they've produced is actually needed. We have a hard cap on lifetime in sandboxes, basically publish or perish. So what we do here is we look at all the content for unlicensed users. I reassign it to me. I send myself a notification. And then we clear out all of the unlicensed users. Again, this is all using the standard REST API. We were using the Tab server client, but because of various delays in their code commits, they haven't updated it beyond API 2.3, and we're currently on 2.6. We do, but it's a small price to pay. So essentially we assign it to whoever well, typically if it's in Sandbox, it's going to get deleted, but if we're removing content off of a production site, we will reassign it to basically the SME, and then I'll just let the extract error and let them deal with it. What's really great about this is in REST API 2.6, we now have field expressions, so it makes it easier to filter this content as opposed to having to like troll through JSON objects. I let Tableau Server do the work there. If you don't mind, I'll show it to you. I think it's this one. Yeah. So this is an IPython notebook. Essentially, we go through, we install a bunch of stuff. This is an older version. And walk through a series of steps to help us parallelize this activity, because if you have a lot of content, we need to get through it quickly. Everything here is designed to fit within AWS Lambda, which has a 5-minute timeout. So we gotta be aggressive about getting through content quickly. The reason we want to use Lambda is that, one, it's cheap, and two, it can be scheduled much easier than Windows Scheduler. And there's no guarantee that Python will work on your server. We run all through the credentials through a config file. We sign in. We page through some stuff. Get all the workbooks. Oh, this is the wrong one. Sorry. Oops. We'll come back to this one. Sorry about that. There's a lot of stuff around content, because as they say, content is king. The next one, and this is a problem I think a lot of people have around DB migration. So this, for us, was we were deprecating on-site content, moving to a new database, a new system in a different data center. This is the same problem going from development to production, retiring hardware, cloud migration, whatever. You're moving from SQL Server to Redshift, or Redshift to Azure, whatever. We have hundreds of workbooks that had multiple data connections, and it became an impossible task to go through and remap all of these. So we wrote this script that allows us to simply look through a workbook, find the connection that it has, and then find its equivalent in the new setup, and it iterates over them and remaps them on the fly. Now, it assumes that it's the same source, so SQL Server to SQL Server. But it works pretty well. I didn't hand code, we didn't code in site switching because we didn't want to mischaracterize a site. We wanted to be able to validate each of the tests by hand. But you could quite easily just add a pager on this to iterate over each site individually. Now, you'll notice that one of the things that gets challenging here is that if anyone here uses a Mac and connects to SQL Server in particular, you have to use a fully qualified path, as opposed to we call it, we have lindmz.dado3 or SE3, but on a Mac we have to actually type out the entire URL for it to be accepted. I guess Microsoft doesn't like aliases on Macs. So we had to account for that in the script, and that's why you may see duplicates in the way that the strings are actually connected. Now, this next one is one of my favorites. As I mentioned before, we had everybody initially as a site admin. It helps us enable people, let them look at all their stuff. But in 2 separate occasions, we had an entire project get deleted. So 30 workbooks, production level, production grade workbooks that were used for day-to-day business activities, gone. And and if anyone here has ever had to try to do a last-minute downtime of Tableau Server, you get a lot of angry emails, phone calls, messages, drive-bys. People get really upset. So we needed to figure out a way to completely do a restore without taking the server down. So we call this the soft restore. So there's 2 pieces to a workbook. There's the content itself, and then ownership and permissions. Because if you publish a workbook, unless you have default permissions set up specifically and it's guaranteed to be the same ones, or you have them locked down at the project level, you may need to have some flexibility, and archiving permissions is a bit of a challenge. Plus, we also need to have the workbooks in a location that is easy to access. So what we do is here, we just archive workbooks to Dropbox. Initially, we were using tab migrate, but it turned out to be slow and hard to automate. So I replicated the tab migrate functionality in a Python script. It maps, it iterates over your sites, preserves the project hierarchy, and spits out TWBs and Twibixes pretty quickly. We got through 800 workbooks in about 3 minutes. There's a couple of multi-gig workbooks in there, so it works pretty well. The last piece is we store all of our permissions in Dynamo. So for those of you who don't know, Dynamo is a database that lives in AWS. It's very high performance for reads and writes. It's not an aggregate database like SQL, but it allows us to store attributes about workbooks. So we have the workbook name, which is the primary key for searches. We have the LUID for REST API calls. We store the owner, the permission, when it was created, and when it's going to expire. The beauty of this is that, one, Dynamo is pretty cheap, as in almost free. You can get away with the script on the free tier forever, assuming you don't want to write 10,000 workbooks at once. But what's nice about it is that if you decide to deprecate a workbook, the workbook will naturally expire out of the database, so you're not storing more than you have to. And now, at any point in time, if someone inadvertently deletes a workbook, we have a relatively recent record of it. We can just upload it, make a call to Dynamo with a subsequent REST API call, and everything's back to normal, no downtime. Pretty easy. Now, that last piece is still a manual operation, but we actually haven't had to develop something that does it yet. But it is pretty straightforward. And in the code, there's actually samples of how to make this call. Now, stale content. We have a lot of stuff that people don't look at. And this isn't just an infrastructure tax. It takes up space on server. It wastes extract resources. It can delay real important content. But more importantly, and most importantly to us at Zillow, is it represents wasted time on behalf of our developers. If someone's asking a person with a Tableau desktop to create something and then not looking at it, not only are you wasting our infrastructure, you've also wasted this analyst's time. So we want to make sure that we're respecting not only our time, but we also want to make it easy for people to actually find content that's meaningful. If you have a bunch of garbage up there, chances are you do a random search and you're going to find some garbage. So how do we get rid of it? How do we clean house to keep server running efficiently? Now, I have to give a hat tip to Mark on this one. He was a big help in setting up kind of the Postgres queries to identify how which content needs to be or is eligible for migration. But essentially, we use data in Postgres. We then process it in Python. We use REST API to tag it. And then we give a user a chance to say, well, no, this is actually important. They can tag it with an exempt tag, or the workbook gets deleted 24 hours later. So our standards are very simple. They can be more complicated, and that's the beauty of Python here, is workbooks that are older than 6 months, if they have 0 views in 90 days, they're done. Sandbox, if your workbook is older than 90 days, you're done. Publish it, put it in production, or get rid of it. Yeah, so whenever a workbook gets tagged, we send them a message on Slack. So it says, hey, your workbook has been tagged with 30, no work necessary. 60, nothing necessary. 90, you have 24 hours. Tag it or it's gone. Again, we're going to do our best to let you know, but if you don't do anything about it, again, you need to be an adult. I actually have the script here, or one of them. You give me a second. So there's 2 parts to it. There is the content tagging and then content deletion. So content tag It may look like a lot, but it's really just a lot of setup. So essentially, we gather all of the credentials that we need. We connect to Postgres. And here is the query that Mark helped me to design that identifies content that meets these standards. It spits out an array of LUIDs, the sites, and then we process them. We treat work production and Sandbox differently, and then we work through the sites. And then essentially there's a bunch of helper functions to get you through the REST API. And then at the bottom, we have a series of arrays that just say, here's the list of stuff, here's the list of exempt, which one is not in the other. You know, Bob's your uncle, and you've got tags. We use 30, 60, 90, and exempt. That's it. Try to keep it simple. That way it's easy for them to find it, but it's also easy for us to track. Now we have the second one is just basically the same set of scripts, but instead of passing a tag, we're passing a delete. It's, again, pretty straightforward. Everything here is just a series of for loops. If, you know, look for things in this list, and if this list meets the criteria, then do X to it. The last one, and this is one of our most recent activities, is extract optimization. There is a setting in TABADMIN that will look at the last 18 hours of workbooks and try to reshuffle extracts by prioritization, but you never have enough backgrounders. You just never do. We even doubled our processes, and we still run into some extracts collision. But people want their stuff when they want it, and that time they want it happens to be 9 a.m. And we just don't have unlimited resources. So how do we prioritize correctly? How do we incentivize good practices, extracts that run fast, or on tables that are indexed, and all of your database best practices, and use the infrastructure that we've actually spent time and money building and procuring? Behind the scenes, almost all of 50% of our workbooks have custom SQL, which drives me nuts. I don't have much hair left because I've been tearing it out. I kid you not, it is awful, and ripping it out is just the SQL, not my hair. So how do we solve this? Well, we go back to Python, and we use a library called Pandas. And Pandas is just a way to help us quickly aggregate data. So what this script does is it allows you to select how you want to group your extract jobs. Is it by site? Is it by schedule? Is it by both, which is first? And what range do you want? So when we say range, we talk about priority. Tableau goes from 0 to 100. We said between 5 and 65. And the reason we did that is we recognize that something at 5 will run before something at 6, but we always want to make sure we're leaving room for true business critical activities. If something's going to land on the CEO's desk, and it needs to be on his desk at 9:10, we have to guarantee that it's going to be there. So we leave some space here. Now, I'll show you this one. This one's a little more interesting. This is actually being evaluated at the moment by Paul Benoob and Brian Mooneyham, because they were the ones who asked this question. So we came up with this function, and don't worry, it's just saying, we look at your average completion time and we look at your failure rate, and we then look at the range of priority you want to pass, and then it spits out a number, and then we discovered an exploit in the, so here's once it's all been run together and grouped, and you change your grouping up here. You can change it in the query, you can change it in Pandas. This is what it actually looks like when it's done. But in order to change this, you can't change priority, or you couldn't change priority in the API yet. I can't confirm that it's in the newest build, but it's probably in 10. It might be in 10.4. So how do we edit priority without writing to Postgres? Well, strangely enough, if you log in to the Viz Portal API and have access and are granted access, because you can mock any activity that a user can select, you have access to the change priority button in Python. But because it's a direct connection to Postgres, you can pass it any ID you want. So if your stuff lives in a different site, regardless of whether or not you have access to that site, I can edit that job from the main login. Security risk? Probably, but I'm going to use it until they close the hole. Because as soon as I said write back to Postgres, everybody was like, don't do that. And at the end, at the very end, all you have to do is run this job. It says set priority workbook, and then the number, and you're done. You just iterate through the list, and everything's pre-calculated. This was just a test for Paul and Brian. All right, got one more for you. Metadata. Where does my stuff come from? What data sources, what systems are my workbooks using? Which tables? Are they custom SQL? Because we don't want custom SQL at all. It obfuscates which systems are actually they're connecting to. It makes it very difficult to actually understand who's using what tables. We care about this because in order for us to surface a consistent view of our analytics, we need to know end-to-end, data to reporting, what that system looks like. There's other areas around standardization of calculations, mining column types, other metadata things. We just care about what's the distribution of tables, schemas, databases, and systems. Tableau really doesn't make this easy. You have to go to Postgres, and this is kind of incomplete, and Matt Coles confirmed this. It will tell you what database it connects to, but it won't tell you anything else. You have to go to the workbook XML, and if anyone's ever spent any time doing XML parsing, you also want to tear your hair out. Thankfully, Star Schema and Tomas have a wonderful tool that does this. This is the only thing in the presentation that I cannot share with you because I had to purchase it. So he's sitting right there. You can just cut him a check, and you can have this too. So what they do is we looked at other options. There's the TWB auditor. It doesn't really work for us because it presupposes that you have access to the workbooks, which we do, but it's not really that great. The document API also kind of works here, but it's unclear as to what the level of support for that is and if it actually solves this. Plus, you still need access to the workbooks. It's a lot harder to do it from Postgres. So what we needed was something that could mine the large object repository, parse the XML in batches, and generate a CSV that just tells us everything we need. So Tomas actually have a tool that does this. It does the export, parses the XML, works through the sites. We added support for Presto, EMR, Cloudera, Redshift, as well as auto-generation of configurations so that we can iterate over everything in our server. And we also do result simplification. It spits out a whole bunch of stuff. We care about one table, so we just delete everything else. And then the glue that fixes all of this together is really? I don't know what happened. Oh, there we go. All right, very quickly. I'll just say it. The glue that fixes all of this together is a capability called AWS Run Command. What Run Command is it's an API that allows you to send terminal commands without SSH access to any machine on-premise or in the cloud, and it's free. And the reason we like this is we can pre-bake documents or we can pre-bake scripts, say SSM, send command. It knows to send this to our Tableau server, and it can run the Python script, it can run backup, cleanup, restart, whatever. It's all logged, it's all auditable. And did I mention that it's free? And it doesn't matter if you're, again, on the cloud or on-prem. I detest PowerShell, so it's a way for me to get around it. Now, if you'll bear with me for 1 second, hopefully my machine doesn't completely crash. Looks like it might have. But we do have some work in progress. We're looking at auto deployment and configuration of Tableau server with things like Terraform. We're looking at other optimizations around workbook extraction. There's a whole bunch of other stuff. But because it's not real, we don't really need to talk about it. I'm happy to talk about it afterwards. What I will say is I saw a lot of you taking pictures of this. Sorry you wasted space on your phone. Everything you saw here is going to get open sourced in like a month. So you're going to get it for free. We'll have everything. It's the workbooks, the documentation, the scripts, everything except Tomas's piece. It'll all be on GitHub. It'll all be on mine or on Zillow's. Have at it. I'm not going to guarantee that I'll handle GitHub issues, but again, I got a day job. But take it, please. Feel free. If you decide there's something interesting in there and you want to commit it back, great. If not, congratulations. Do your thing. I'm more than happy to help. Hopefully this presentation has been somewhat interesting and useful to you in thinking about how Zillow itself thinks about and manages analytics. We've got about 10 minutes. I'm happy to take any questions, clarifications about what you saw here. I'll show you as much code as I can, or happy to answer any questions about Zillow in general. So thank you very much.